Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin and here are some books that I read recently. Funnily enough, I only have one book on this list that I have a physical copy of, and it's Nightblood by Ellie Blake, the last book in the Frostblood trilogy. I am not okay. I am sad that it's over. I kind of just flew through this book. I read it in like one day, and I could not stop reading it because I had to know what was going on, and I feel kind of sad that it's over now, but I really love this series. It's set in a world that is kind of a polar fantasy. Is part of the world is kind of like polar fantasy, where the Frostbloods live, and Frostbloods are people who have kind of like the ability to do frost kind of magic. They're kind of like, you know, they have frost powers, cold powers, can make ice and, you know, snow and everything that has to do with cold, frost, snow, like that kind of thing. And these people are also very like reserved and cold as people, like as a society. They are very like reserved and calm, and they can also be very vicious, which cold can also be. And then we have the rival country or place, which is home of the Firebloods, and we follow the main character is a Fireblood. So she has like a temper, she is warm-blooded, so she's always warm, and sometimes she can get like fuming, and she has that kind of power that is connected to heat, fire, you know, all of that stuff. And she grew up in the Frostbloods world. For being a Fireblood, she was put in prison, and she escaped prison by the help of a rebellion group. And this rebellion is to kind of overthrow the king. And in this kind of camp that they live, the rebellion group, I don't know a better word for that, she meets Arcus, and they hate each other for being Fireblood and Frostblood. So Ruby hates Arcus because he's a Frostblood, and he hates her because she's a Fireblood, and they both have prejudices against the other person for belonging to that group of people. And that's kind of like the first book, and the first book, I love that book. I just love the setting of this world, and the second book was so good, and it kind of gave revelations that I feel like I should have expected things that happened, because they made sense that they happened, but I wasn't expecting them to happen. And that is kind of like when world building and the story is done well, in my opinion, because if I can say like this is going to happen, if I can like foresee events of a book, it's not going to be fun when that revelation comes. And if a thing happens that makes absolutely no sense, then that would also be very like, why? But when the story is written in that kind of way that when a revelation happens and you're like, oh my god, but it makes sense, you know, like that feels a lot better. But this was a beautiful conclusion. There were a few things in this that I wish didn't happen, but I'm really happy that I got to finish this series, and I am so thrilled that I got to read this. I read the first book in February and the second book in September, and then this on the second day of October. So yeah, really happy that I read this. I gave it 5 stars, obviously. It was a beautiful conclusion to one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. And the rest of the books that I'm going to talk about, I read on this little thing. So I got myself an e-reader. This is the Onyx Books. I always say books, but I think it's books. But I always say books because like books. But this is the Onyx Books Poke 2, I think. It's the Onyx Books Poke 2, if I remember correctly. It's a really cute, like I call this Stella. And the rest of the books that I read recently in the month of October were all ebooks, which I love reading ebooks, but I hate reading ebooks on my computer or on my phone because like it doesn't give me the same sense of reading as it would if I have like an e-reader. I used to have I still have an iPad, but it's kind of like second or third generation iPad. Is like 10 years old, so it's not up to date with everything. So I could read it. I only used it to read books, but since it's too slow now, like it doesn't want to load the apps that I read ebooks on, I can't use it as an e-reader. So I decided I'm gonna buy an e-reader. So I bought this. And the first ebook that I read was A Quick and Easy Guide to Asexuality by Molly Muldoon and Will Hernandez. This was a beautiful graphic novel about asexuality and everything asexual. And as you know, I asexual. I identify as someone on the asexual spectrum, demisexual to be exact. And Molly is also demisexual, so it was kind of great to see how they explained what it is to be asexual and the whole spectrum of asexuality, as well as kind of discussing common misconceptions about asexuality. And there was also a part of this that I really loved that kind of talked about, you know, like common questions that asexuals get, like, don't you want a family? Don't you want to get married? Like, do you only date other asexuals? And like all of these questions that are very common to ask people on the asexual spectrum. So I thought that was very well done. I just really enjoyed this. It's a very short book, but I obviously gave it 5 stars. I thought it was beautiful. And it's a non-fiction graphic novel that is very easy to get through. And if you're curious about asexuality, or you are asexual or someone on the asexual spectrum and you want to give kind of like an easy way for other people to understand what that means, then this could be a good way to do that. The second book that I read was Boys Run the Riot by Kato Gatku. This book follows a guy called Ryo, and he is a trans guy, and he has to like struggle with identity as he lives in Japan. This is only set in Japan, and they have school uniforms and they go to high school, and so Ryo has to dress as a girl to school, which he doesn't like to do, obviously, and he tries as often as he can to forget to wear his school uniform. And he gets friends with this guy who is kind of like, he is a third year, but he does the second year again, like he's moved down a class or something like that. And this guy is called Jin, and he is very much an outcast in a lot of ways. Like, he doesn't care what other people think about him. He doesn't care what other people say about him. And, you know, like, he only does his own thing. And as he and Ryo becomes friends, Jin is kind of like, you want to start a fashion brand with me? And this story is kind of like their friendship, being outcasts in this school, coming together and showing like who they are and embracing their own identity and working together on this fashion brand. And this was very fun, very quick to read. And I think the way that Ryo as a trans guy is treated is very like respectful, which also makes sense because the author of this story is a trans guy. I really enjoyed that part of it. And just the friendship between Ryo and Jin was amazing. I gave this book 4 stars mostly because it felt like it wasn't fully developed. And what I mean by that is it is the first volume of a manga series, so I guess I want to read the next installment. So when I do that, I think it will flow better. But as just one installment, it felt very abrupt in a lot of ways. But I can't give it 5 stars because there were a few things that I felt like, you know, but I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. It was one of the first mangas that I read also, which I think it was a very fun manga to read. And the last book that I finished in October so far was Lost in the Future by Damien. I don't know how well you can see this. This story is about a few students who are on a school trip to look at some different things. I don't remember if it's kind of like old architecture and stuff like that, but they are on a school trip, and then the school bully or the class bully is being a bully and accidentally pushes a fellow student into a portal to the future. But on the student's way down, he pulls other people with him. So all of our main characters are students, go into the same class, and they fall into a portal to the future. And it's them in the future and trying to understand what is going on. And the future that they arrived at is not what we would think was the future, because it's very different from what we would expect from a futuristic setting, which I thought was really, really well done. Like, I really enjoy the fact that Damien completely twisted the idea of the future in that way, and we're following these classmates as they are trying to figure out how to return to their own timeline. And this is also the first book in the series. The first book is called The Storm, or just Storm, but the series is called Lost in the Future. And I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was very quick and easy to understand. It is for a younger audience than I am, but I still really enjoyed it. So those are the 4 books that I have finished so far in October. I hope you've enjoyed, and please let me know how many books have you got into this month so far, and I will see all of you next time. Good reading. Bye.